Hi, my name is Karen, and today we're going to be learning a little bit about crocheting. I have been crocheting since I was 8 years old, and my mom taught me how, and I learned in 4-H classes as well. When I started crocheting, I hated it, but as I continued to learn to crochet and put forth the effort, I grew to love it, and I've been crocheting ever since. Here it is 30 plus years later, and I've been crocheting my way through life. Today we'll be discussing the history of crochet, what is crocheting exactly, and how to pick out yarn and correlating hooks from the packages, and how to get started. First off, what is crocheting? The resources I used were the Crochet Guild, simplemost.crochet.com, counseling.org, craftyyarncouncil.com, joecreates.com, and lastly, handmadebyhaniya.blogspot. How do we get started? What you first need is you need a crochet needle, yarn, hands, and a pattern. Here's a crochet hook or a crochet needle. And as you can see, it's a little bit different than a knitting needle. It has a little hook there on the end. And I have a knitting needle in comparison. This is a needle. You'll need 2 of these if you're knitting. Some people even crochet with just their hands, and they have big chunky yarn and they make these huge blankets, and as they crochet, they make them with their hands, but that's very expensive yarn and I've never bought that. How do you pick out the yarn? Well, first of all, you have to know what project you're going to make. I've made blankets and afghans for weddings. I've made baby blankets for babies. I've made little baby sweaters and booties and hats. You need to know what the project is to know what kind of yarn to use. You would not want to use hemp or cotton, which is for washcloths, for let's say for a wedding gift. You wouldn't want to make a big blanket out of that because it's just more of a very useful type of yarn for maybe hot pads or maybe even for the washcloths, but definitely not for a blanket. You want a blanket to be nice and soft and fluffy. So the types of yarn that they have the naturals, which are made out of plants or animals. And then there's synthetic, which is made from recycled plastic and new plastic. The synthetic ones you don't want to use for hot pads because they will melt. The natural ones are what I stick to the most. You have wool, hemp, cotton, llama, and alpaca wool. And based on the yarn that you have is going to determine what type of hook you have. So right here, I'm going to stop share for a moment. So I want you to get a good look at this. Right here, on the back of this yarn, you can see 3 different things, and these are important to know. This right here is the weight of the yarn. This is a baby weighted yarn. It's thinner than the other yarn, and this is what you want to use for babies. You have the size of knitting needles they recommend and the crochet hook size that they recommend. You do not have to use the size that they give you, but I like to use that size because then you know you're going to get the right type of weave and the right amount of tightness between the crochet loops. So I like to use what they recommend. So once you've picked out the yarn and you go to pick out the hooks, you might be overwhelmed by how many hooks they have. They have ergonomic hooks. They have hooks for working with lace, for around the collars and around the hems of your dresses or shirts, and you can make even lace for weddings. I've seen people make wedding veils, make their own wedding veils, and they're absolutely stunning. They could be made out of wood, plastic, and metal. Most of mine are made out of metal because the wooden ones are expensive and they really don't make that many anymore. And the plastic ones that I have are hand-me-downs from my mom or heirlooms. So the finger method is where for making a slip knot. If you've ever made a slip knot, this is how you do it. You put the yarn around your finger twice, and you use the opposite finger of your dominant hand. You pinch the two loose yarns below your finger together with the remaining finger on the hand holding the yarn. You pick up the back yarn behind the finger that has the two pieces of yarn on it. So you're gonna pull one of them forward, and then you're gonna pull the other one forward over the yarn. And you do this twice and then pull it twice, tight. To begin to crochet, you place the hook inside the first slip knot that you've made, and holding on to the slip knot and yarn with the non-dominant hand, and with the dominant hand you use the hook, and you grab the yarn underneath the hook and pull it through that slip knot, and you've made your first crochet chain. And as you start, you'll do a chain of so many long, and then you start up doing it, you add up, you go back the other way, back and forth. Here is a picture of a crocheted sweater. As you can see, there is a pattern. It goes back and forth. You can see the ribbing on this. I call it the ribbing because you can see the lines where the person went back and forth. And I think they used the treble, which means they crocheted 3 into 1 hole and then skipped a hole. And as you can see, there's a website you can go to that has a free crochet pattern. Pinterest has a lot of places that you can go to get free crochet patterns. Like I said, you can get them on the inside of this, or maybe I didn't tell you, but you can get them on the inside of here. So don't throw that away, and be careful when you take it off, is that you can get a free pattern on the inside of there. This right here is a knit sweater. And the way you can tell it's a knit sweater is because it says so, but also because it's flat. You can't see any ribbing back and forth, or if you can, it's a lot more delicate and harder to see. You can make patterns. If you've ever heard of a cable knit sweater, you can do those. I don't know how to do them, but it takes a lot of pins and a lot of extra needles. You have to have more than 2 to do it. And right here at the bottom of this, you can see that it kind of looks like it's rolling up. And that's what happens when you knit, is that it creates this rolled, sometimes will roll up. I prefer a knit sweater over a crocheted sweater, but I prefer a crocheted blanket over a knit blanket. The second part of my speech, I want to talk to you about the history of crochet. And I got that off of the Crocheting Guild of America. And this is what they think. They do know that they found some crocheted baby dolls, or little dolls that were crocheted in caskets of little girls in about the 13th century. So they think it goes back that far. I think personally it goes back to Adam and Eve, but I don't know that. That's just my philosophy. And how it got to Europe is that they think that it started in the Afghanistan area, and that it traveled on the Silk Highway, which goes to China, which kind of makes sense, that it may have come from China and then moved to Afghanistan and traveled to Europe. And you think of Europe, you think of the places like Norway and Denmark and Ireland and Scotland that have the beautifully crocheted sweaters that they're really well known for. And that makes a lot of sense. So by about the 15th century, it had traveled to a place called Ireland. And we all know where Ireland is. Have you ever heard of the potato famine? Well, in Ireland, there was this great big potato famine that they were all starving, and crocheting had started up there and taken off there. And as these people were starving, they figured out that they could make money selling lace crocheted collars to the European women. And the women in Europe didn't know where these collars were coming from, but they just loved them and they were beautiful. And the Irish crocheted, the men, the women, and the children, they all crocheted as they were doing their chores. And their crochet work, of course, got absolutely filthy. But once they were crocheted, you could wash them and clean them up and no one would be the wiser. They would crochet during the day, and at night, they would put them underneath their mattresses if they were lucky enough to have a mattress. And this is how many families in Ireland were able to earn enough money to gain passage to the American continent. And that's how crocheting got to the American continent. Once they came to the United States, they then started trading this merchandise among their American friends. And many of them even shared how to do crocheting with them. And as they did that, that became part of the American story of how crocheting got to the United States. And it became part of many families' repertoire. Recent studies indicate that crocheting can have a calming effect, and they've used it for dementia patients and those with mental illnesses. At counseling.org, I found a website where this lady had done her master thesis on crocheting, and she studied families and people that have dementia, and she invited them into a little workshop that was like a coffee house type of a feeling or a library feeling, where you go and you learn and you socialize with each other. And they created friendships with people that everybody in the group had dementia, and they created this friendships, and the actual crocheting part had a calming effect, and she proved that does work to calm dementia patients. Also at Happiness or Crochet Therapy, I learned that, simplemost.com says that crochet had a blog post where she found studies on people that do crochet, and they found that people that crochet are happier, more productive people because they're always doing something. When they have downtime, they sit in front of the TV and crochet, or you can crochet when you're talking to someone, and it makes them feel productive. And being productive is connected to helping people, feel happier. In conclusion, we learned how to pick out yarn and get started with crocheting. We learned the interesting history of crocheting and how it saved many Irish families who would have starved without it. And we learned about the benefits of crocheting on the mentally ill and those that are aging. Hopefully, you can now tell the difference between a knit sweater and a crocheted one. If you want more information, you can go to craftyyarncouncil.com and craftyyarncouncil.com standards for the crochet abbreviations. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and you all have a great week.